everyone, and welcome to Be Bold, Fierce, Unstoppable. I'm your host, Zach Lyotis. In today's podcast, we have Joi Fisher Griffin. She's an author, entrepreneur, experienced educator, a passionate adoption advocate, and patron of the arts. After going through her own struggles as an adoptee, Joi wrote her memoir, Finding Joy, a true story of faith, family, and love, which debuted in 2019. And she is the author of 2 best-selling children's adoption books, Choosing Joy and Singing with Joy. She shared her story so that she could help others who sit in silence about their struggles. And she continues to find ways to be open about adoption, not only with adults, but to start the conversation with young people too. Joi established the Belong Project, an adoption awareness campaign to help normalize conversations around adoption. And she serves as an adoptee and survivor team coordinator with Miriam's Heart organization in New Jersey. Help me welcome Joi to the show. Hello, Joi. How are you doing?
Good. How are you? Thank you for having me.
This is a great pleasure to have you on the show. And the reason, like I talked to you before the show, the reason I wanted to have you on here is because I feel that we have to, like you said, normalize this conversation. I find adoption is almost a bad stigma like depression.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't have an open communication about how people are feeling and express themselves, I think that we're going to reach a milestone where we're not fully aware of the truth of who we are. So I'm so happy to have you on the show here today. I have no clue about adoption, even though my brother and sister told me I was adopted. Maybe it's a joke, maybe it's not. I don't know.
That was a common joke when we were younger. Yes.
You're adopted. But at the end of the day, that's no laughing matter, because sometimes I really do feel adopted. I'm not gonna lie.
Yes.
However, for someone that has gone through adoption or is experiencing the emotional turmoil through adoption, I think we have to start the conversation in order for healing to happen. And the best people to speak to are the ones that are going through adoption. So you wrote your book. Let me get to the title of it. Finding Joy, a true story of faith, family, and love. It was a beautiful book. And when I started reading your book, my first question was, how old was she when she got adopted? And
I was actually 2 months. I was 2 months of age. And one of the things that I mentioned, and I don't know, I believe I mentioned it in the book, is about, no, I think I've just been talking about it quite a bit lately, is trauma and loss. And that, a lot of people automatically assume, well, oh, she was adopted at 2 months. She doesn't remember anything. She doesn't know anything. It shouldn't really bother her. But if you think about it, it's a loss. It's a loss of your birth mother that you're starting your life with. It's a loss of the person who carried you in the womb. We often talk to pregnant mothers and tell them, talk to your child that's in your womb, play music. We ask mothers to do that because they believe that scientifically it has an impact on the child that's in your womb. So how can you then say because someone is 2 months or 4 months or 6 months once they're adopted, that it's not going to have an impact? You have separated them from their birth parent. So down the line, there is going to be some trauma there. You don't know what happened while the child was in the womb. If the mother was stressed out, that all impacts the baby.
Absolutely. So when I found out you were 2 months old, when I was reading the book, I thought, wow, there's a lot of emotional uproar. Even as a 2-year-old child, you may not know on a physical level, but on an emotional and spiritual level, you are feeling that. At the end of the day, you are definitely feeling that, because spirit's alive any time of your
Birthright.
Yeah. So when I heard that, I was just like, wow, she must have been through a journey. So you were adopted at 2. When did you find out you were adopted?
I would say I know it was before I went off to kindergarten. So I would think that I think it was around when I was 4 or 5. My mother always used stories to tell everything, which kind of is the reason why I wrote the children's books. But she would use stories. She would make up stories. And then at times she would bring up that I was adopted and that my birth mother wasn't able to care for me, and that she really wanted me to be in a family that would be able to care and raise me. Because she couldn't. And that was just the storyline throughout my life. So I knew at a very young age, although we didn't talk about adoption a lot in our family, that was what resonated with me in terms of the storyline that I've just heard year after year after year.
So now that you're saying that your mom couldn't take care of you and that's why she adopted you, you had a photo album and your daughter Tracy found this album.
Yes.
I wasn't going to go there this early, but since you brought that up, and there in the front page, there was a saying, and I didn't write the saying down. I wish I wrote it down.
I wasn't expected. I was selected. Yeah, so that was my, I guess, my birth announcement that they used to send out to different family members. And it had my birth weight, my birth length. I know they put the weight, the length, your birth date, and where you were born, what city and state. And so that was something that always stayed. And I have this little pale yellow cloth, very old material photo album, but I never told my kids about my adoption. I always stuck that photo album inside the larger photo album. So when my oldest was about maybe nine or 10, they were cleaning, they were doing their chores for once, and they came running in the room and they looked very sad. And my middle daughter, Tracy, her head was kind of down and she looks up at me and says, "Mommy, you were adopted." And I'm going, and then I see them with the book. So I know what they read. I said, "Tracy, I know that." "Well, how come we didn't know? How much did you cost?" I said, "See, that's exactly why I didn't want to tell you, because I didn't know what questions you would go and ask your grandparents. And I didn't really know how to have that conversation with you." So on one hand, yes, it was something that I hid from them. But when they found out, I just made sure that I told them, if you do want to ask your grandparents some questions, ask them in private, because they were curious. They wanted to know, they had questions. They wanted to ask me different things. And I just said, just make sure you do it in private. Don't do it in the middle of a family dinner or something and question them in front of everybody else. But figure out how to do it if you want. If you want to ask me, to ask them, the door is kind of open to that, but just be sensitive with the topic.
Yeah, absolutely. But it sounds like your adopted parents were great parents. Like reading through it, seeing the pictures in the back for like that family reunion that you had, I
Yeah.
couldn't believe the resemblance between your mom, your birth mom, and your adopted mom.
Yeah, one of
Like,
the things that I learned when I went to the legislative hearing when they changed the laws in the state of New Jersey, in that first conversation with other adoptees, adopted parents, and birth parents, they said that was something that was done back in the 60s and 70s. If they could match up an adoptive parent's look to the birth parent's look, they would try to do that. And like you said, when you saw the pictures, people think that they're twins. Actually, they still get them confused.
yeah, I was kind of shocked. I was like, whoa, this is really close. Now I read it, I
Yes.
was like, this is kind of interesting. Let's talk about the legislation because this shocked me. That when was it? The May 27th of what year? I can't even read my own writing that I wrote. I think it was 2014
Mhm.
that they passed this legislation. So prior to that, you weren't able to get your birth certificate. Is that what it was?
Yeah, adoptees, when they're born and you have a closed adoption, your records are sealed. So the only thing I had on my birth certificate growing up all these years was my first and last name, the name that my adoptive parents gave me, and then I had the city and the state that I was born in, my birth weight, and my birth height. Yeah, and my birthday. But beyond that, there wasn't anything else that was there. We get what's called an amended birth certificate, and amended birth certificate. So for me, it was the legislation change was allowing in the state of New Jersey, because every state has their own laws, but in the state of New Jersey, it was going to allow folks who were born between 1940 and 2015 who had closed adoption records to be able to have access to their records. But in 2014, when they finally agreed to pass the law, one of the requirements was that they had to allow birth parents the opportunity to redact their information before the law was actually implemented. So in 2014, birth parents could write to the state and say, I don't want my name given to my child, my birth child, or my biological child. Please take it off of the birth certificate. So they had that option up until December of 2016. So they had a couple years to be able to do that. And what what was supposed to happen is if they were going to redact their name, they were being asked to at least give the medical history so that the adoptee would get the birth certificate. The name would pretty much just be blacked out, but they would also get their medical history. Over the course of time with the transition of the legislation going back and forth in the courts and all that, the whole piece about getting your medical history as a requirement, that piece was removed from the legislation. So by the time the law became implemented, you either got your birth certificate with the information or you got your birth certificate with the names blacked out.
Wow. That is so much to just process if you're going through this, because you're dealing with trauma, you're dealing with abandonment issues, dealing with not being enough, you're dealing with all these other emotions. What were some emotions that you dealt with early on, finding out that you were adopted?
I think that a fear, wondering if I was lovable, if my birth mother didn't keep me, if she relinquished me, then why would anybody else really love me? I struggle with that, and that in turn impacted my decision in relationships down the line. Wondering if people would stay. I realize now that I have some I still have some challenges with friendships and relationships, with wondering, okay, so you're here now, are you actually going to leave, or are you going to be here? So those are things that I've truly been working on as an adult. But now that I've gotten to know some adoptees, I realize this is some things that we all kind of struggle with. But through counseling and through support groups, I'm realizing that it's the normal part of being an adoptee, and that I just have to learn how to work through those things and not let that fear of somebody leaving me, that fear of abandonment, that feeling unworthy, my self-esteem issues, to not allow that to get into the way of building relationships with people and realizing and recognizing where it comes from.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be the biggest chapter right there, is that abandonment issue, because you feel abandoned from your mom.
Yes. Yeah.
And did you feel more abandoned from your mom, or was it equal mom and dad?
I originally, it was always mom. And then when I got to college, I wrote to the adoption agency, and I think I was pregnant, and I was about to have my first daughter, and I wanted to know my medical history. And so I was going to send in the information to apply to get that, but then I realized there was a fee for that. So I actually didn't get it until my second daughter was born. And that you get non-identifying information from the adoption agency. So that gave me a little bit about the history of my father, of things that my birth mother had written, and a little bit of information about my birth mother, but none of it was about health. So at that point, I think that's when I began to think, oh, my birth father is out there. She said some positive things about him in the notes that she left. And then when I spoke to the adoption agency, they said, well, your birth mother wrote more than what most people write. And what they were writing back then in the 70s. So you were kind of fortunate with that information, because I actually called them back. I said, hey, you all said this is some non-identifying information. I'm looking for medical history, and all it said was parents were in good health, period. And I'm like, wow, all these years, this is what I've been hoping for, and this is all I'm going to get.
Wow. It just kind of blows my mind that you have to deal on an emotional level of being an adoptee, not knowing who your parents were, but then to have the government withhold information for your health, information for your children's health,
Right.
and to know that, like, you're almost kind of left in the dark. How does one deal with something like that?
It's very challenging. And as I shared a little earlier, every state, their laws are different. So although New Jersey, we passed our laws in 2017, every state does not have the same laws. They don't have the same years as in time frame that people can get their information. So it's a challenge. And then that's one of the things you often hear advocates saying, don't we have a right to our information? One of the big proponents of the law in New Jersey were a number of birth mothers, because many of the advocates who were against, not advocates, the folks who were against the law changing kept saying, well, birth mothers were promised to be anonymous. And so in their records, they would say they were promised that they would be given anonymity over the years, and that they didn't have to worry about this child coming and looking for them later on. So there were some birth mothers who were a part of our advocacy group in New Jersey who said, we have our original documentation from when they relinquished their children in the 60s. And they said nothing on the paperwork that we signed says that we were promised that we would have to remain anonymous. So that was never our intention. So they were asking the media and everybody else to stop painting the picture as if birth mothers don't want to find their children, and so they started coming out as birth mothers and birth fathers. We have some birth fathers in our group who are letting people know, don't listen to that. That's not true. We do want to know as well. And there's some that do and there's some that don't.
Yeah, I could imagine some that do, some that don't. Wow, I just a matter, just feelings. I got goosebumps all over my body. Like I said, I've never been adopted other than the jokes my family would give on me. But at the end of the day, for someone that is going through this, I can't imagine what happens to them on a psychological level when they're in between so many, like their growth spurt. They may feel different. They may not feel like they connected. I know in your book you said that, I think it was an aunt from your dad's side, if I was correct, that you didn't look the way your family looked. I can't remember. I read so many books lately, but I'm trying to put it all together.
Yeah.
Where you didn't look that part. So how did that make you feel?
Yeah. My mother and I'm talking about my adopted mother. We favor complexion wise. And so that helped in the transition. But then when people saw me just with my father, they would say, oh, well, she must look like her mother, or somebody would always have some sort of comment to make. And that's one of the things that even in same race adoptions, there's going to be some differences that are just going to stand out. And then parents have to figure out how they're going to deal with that. And as we were talking a little earlier about transracial adoptees, that's when you're adopted by a person of a different race, you automatically stand out. So those are some of the challenges that adoptive families and parents and the adoptees are faced with over time.
Yeah, absolutely. I always say, because I always thought about adoption, you always see these stars adopting little kids from Africa or Uganda, wherever it is. And I'm like, I want to do that too. But then it triggered me after one of my friends, she was a Black woman and she was adopted into that white family, but she never felt fulfilled knowing her cultural background and where she came from, her roots or anything like that. And that actually opened my eyes. That opened my eyes to say, you know what? That's not fair to the child.
Right. And I think that's something transracial adoptive parents have to consider. If you are going to take in a child of a different race or a different culture, what's your commitment to teaching them about their race and their culture? What's your commitment to embedding yourself and your family into their culture as well, so that they don't grow up kind of resenting their parents because they just know nothing about their identity in that sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you have to definitely do like a trip or a tour or some sort of travel to their homeland to really teach them their roots, because at the end of the day, that's who they are. That's where they come from. That's the seat of their soul at that
Right.
point. So if
And
we're not,
beyond that, having them around folks that look like them, having them, people who are in your home, pictures on the wall, all that matters. All that matters if you're in a transracial adoptive family, that you see pictures that look similar to you in your home and also of your parents, so that you do feel like you belong in that space.
absolutely, absolutely. So your adopted parents were supportive right from the beginning in finding your birth parents.
Yeah, they were. As I said, we didn't always talk about adoption in our house, but anytime, because although the legislation was approved to move forward in 2014, you're talking years before that, where the advocates of the organization I eventually found and have become a part of, they had been fighting for the law to change for 34 years. So for 34 years, many of them had been fighting for the legislation to change in the state of New Jersey. And along the way, as I got older, I remember my teen years and then throughout high school and college, my parents would give me copies of whatever was in a newspaper. We're a big newspaper reading family. So they clip out the article, make sure they sat it on my bed. We were talking about it around the dinner table, wrote questions on the top for us to discuss later. And although they never said, Joy, we think you're going to go and do this, or if you want to, go ahead, it was always arming me with the information so that I can make that decision as I got older.
I mean, that's very supportive. Kudos to your adopted parents, because I think they did a great job in just expressing themselves from what I felt reading and everything like that. But what would you tell those people that have adopted children to how to deal with it, how to have that conversation, start that conversation.
Again, I think it goes back to using resources, using articles when they come up in the paper, when things came on television as they were debating back and forth about whether or not the legislation should be approved or not approved, having them be a part of those conversations, finding there's so many national workshops. And I didn't know, right up the street, a college from us, every year, this year was their 38th anniversary of a national adoption conference. Had no clue it was right in my area. But I think if we begin to do more work to promote and share the resources that are out there, we'll be able to better support the families who can then have that information to help guide those discussions. There's a book publishing house, tapestrybooks.com. Everything in their publishing house are adoptive and foster related stories. So just being aware of the resources that are there to help drive that conversation that people can have with their families.
Yeah, that's one thing. I'm sure there's a lot of resources out there. So for anyone that is going through the process of adoption, either you adopted someone or you're an adoptee and you're trying to get some answers, go find a support group out there. Because at the end of the day, you're really not alone. There's a lot of people going through that same struggle. Then my tears are going to start bubbling up here because I'm so emotional when it comes to things like this, because that sense of abandonment that's felt, or that sense of being alone, when you feel like you have no one to talk to, and there's no answers to what's happening. It's almost like, why are you making people go through this? And that's like the legislation. So what other states have passed this legislation? Is there many states that have passed this legislation?
I believe there's 15, but I don't know. Like I said, our years are 1940 to 2015. And then you can apply to get access. Everybody has some sort of fee you have to pay to the state to request that information. And everybody has their different rules on when or how the birth parent may have redacted the information, what their rules were. And some people, their legislation is still up in the air and hasn't been decided yet.
Okay. So if you're going through this, check out your legislation. If you're in Canada, figure it out, because I have no idea where to tell you to go. But I will have
there's a website, adopteerightslawcom, adopteerightslawcom, and that gives you information on, I believe, every state. It gives you information on what's going on in your particular state, where the legislation stands, what's the history of the legislation, what's passed, what's not, what's still in the works.
That's going to be in the show notes below. So if anyone you need that website, it's going to be in the show notes below, just to make this process a little easier for you. So for everyone that has gone through the process, and for you to find who your birth parents were, that was a journey.
Yes, it was.
Wow.
Thanks to DNA test, and thanks to Google and Facebook, and some detective work, we were able to put the pieces together. But the ultimate key to putting the pieces together still focused on the legislation change and me getting the original birth certificate that gave me my birth mother's name. Because I did find a relative on Ancestry a year and a half earlier, before any of the reunions happened. I found her on Ancestry. She and I had been talking for a year and a half, could not figure out for the life of us how we were actually related. And so I just told her, I said, well, the law is going to change in January. So maybe, we'll check back in with each other to see where we are and see if I have a name. So she checked back in with me in early January. And I said, wait a minute, let me run downstairs and see when the legislation announcement is supposed to be, because both of my parents had actually placed in my mailbox a copy of an article that came out. And I ran downstairs, looked on that, because I always store them in different places. So I looked at the article, and the meeting was actually the next day. And the next day was going to be the press release of the law becoming in existence and everything that was going to be implemented. So that day, I found the website. I emailed the person who was in charge. I said, I may have missed the opportunity to pay for lunch and all the other stuff, but I really would like to be in the room. She said, Joi, come on down. You probably just bring your own lunch with you. and we'll make sure that you're able to get in the room to see what was going on. And from there, I went to the state house the next day, told my boss I wasn't coming to work and that I had to go find out about this adoption thing that was going on at the state house. Now, he had no clue I was adopted, so I knew he would be waiting on pins and needles for me to get back. But I went that next day and listened to the press release of the media and saw actually some adoptees get their birth certificates in their hand while we were at the event. So I knew that my day was coming soon.
Yeah, they received the brown envelope.
Yes, I was a little jealous.
Yeah, and you said one of the guys didn't open his envelope in front of the media.
Yeah, because at that point we were in the press room and all the cameras were around and they wanted the two of them to open up their envelope in front of everybody. And the one guy said, no, he wasn't interested in doing that because, again, remember, we didn't know, you don't know if their parents' information is going to be redacted or not. So then the one woman did open up her record. So the cameras are there, they're waiting, they're asking her, so what can you tell us? And she pretty much said, all I'll tell you is that there is a name. And she kind of left it at that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's incredible. The support that has to be in that room at that time. See, I feel like tearing up again, just thinking about it.
I cried the entire time. I know when there was a woman there who was doing a documentary on the changes of New Jersey over the past 34 years. I said, I know whenever it comes out, all you'll see me is just standing in the corner crying. I could not contain myself.
Yeah, I'm trying to contain myself right now. Trust me when I tell you. I'm like, I just feel so emotional for everyone because it's almost like you're just this, what it sounds like is you're just this lost soul in the world and no one wants to give you answers.
Right. And you know that the answers exist. I knew that in that building in Trenton that they had my original birth certificate, but they had it under lock and key and I didn't have a right to it. It just isn't fair. It wasn't fair. It isn't fair. So somebody finally, legislators and everyone finally agreed. And that's how we ended up getting to the legislation change.
Yeah. And that's the crazy part, that information has your name on it.
Mm-hmm.
It describes every part of you, but you don't have privilege to that.
No,
you don't have privilege to knowing where you came from or who you are.
Yeah. And it wasn't until that, after the press release, when I went to the reception that they had, it wasn't until then that I found out that there was an actual birth name. So your birth parent does name you at the time that you're born. And I had no clue about that. So I knew not only when I got my birth certificate that not only would I find out what hospital I was born, I didn't even know that, but I would also find out whatever my birth name was. So that was, it was overwhelming, eventually opening the envelope and seeing all that information right there on print in front of me. It kind of confirmed my existence. It confirmed that, that there was care taken to give me a name at the time. And I just couldn't imagine even what that would have been like as a mother in those moments.
Did you like your birth name?
I don't think that it suits me. I think Joi is more my thing, but it was Sherry. It was Sherry.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can see Joi. I can see Joi. Can't see Sherry.
Yeah.
I'm trying to visualize a Sherry, but no.
Yeah. So I laughed kind of when I saw it because that's the first thing I did. I started thinking of Sherry's in my mind. I'm going, okay. So
yeah. So how did your kids take all this information once they found out that you were adopted?
When they were younger, when they found out, it was kind of like they had those questions for my parents, and eventually they asked whatever they wanted. My parents answered however they chose, and it was left alone. But when this came up, and I just talked to my youngest daughter about this the other day, she said, it wasn't until recently that I realized that someone told her, those are your biological grandparents and your biological aunts and uncles. And at first she was going, no, that's my mother's birth. And then she said, but that's your biological family too. And she was the one who, once I told them that I found them, her idea was, oh, that's your thing, Mommy. We don't think that it really concerns us. So she didn't feel a connection to what was about to happen. Well, here we are, 4 years later, and yesterday or 2 days ago, she finally said, I really realized the impact that this has had on me. to see people who look like me, whose stature is like me, whose mannerisms are like me. She said, now I see why that was so important. And originally I didn't think it had anything to do with me, but now I'm getting it. And I said, okay, 4 years later, but okay.
Yeah, because it's a lot for them to process too if they have
Yeah,
no
it is
idea.
because I say we have a blended family on steroids now, and everybody is around, and it takes time to develop relationships. There's a lot of us, there's a lot of them. We're very a close knit family, so and their sides of my birth mother and birth father sides of the family are very close knit. So trying to mesh all of that into one, it's taking time, and I have to realize that just because I did find them, that is still going to take time to build a relationship. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take continued interaction and experiences for us to get to the point where everybody's, kind of moving and shaking and working everything out.
Getting to know one another all over again.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What would you tell the people out there that are adopted that can't get their hands on their birth certificate?
Whoa, that's a good question. Keep working on you. I would say find a support group, find a counselor, find some other adoptees, adoptive parents, and birth parents to just talk about, your journey. Just share the things that you're feeling, because everybody doesn't get it. Everybody doesn't get that every time I go to the doctors, they're asking me my medical history prior to this, and I had no clue. So I could say, I don't know, I'm adopted, but then you still get the question over and over and over again. So I think when you begin to find people within the adoption triad who understand some of your struggles, some of your challenges, that helps you in your healing process to be able to just talk about this. I never talked about my adoption experience until I met that group at the legislative hearing and the legislative celebration. And since then, I saw the place that they were in and how they spoke about their adoption. And I wanted to get to that point. So I would say just find a support group, find a small circle or some folks that, could help you along the way as you learn to express how you're feeling. And because what I realize is that things that I thought were weird or quirky about me are part of my adoption issues, are part of my issues with identity, are part of my issues with self-esteem and all those other things. But that is normal and it's okay. And it's not going to be the end, because it gets better when you begin to talk about it and realize, oh, we're kind of all in the same boat. This isn't, anything crazy or weird. It's just something that I have to learn to work through.
Absolutely. And I mean, not even being adopted, I have to work through all those emotions that are coming to the surface, right?
Yeah.
So as an adoptee, I could imagine it could be just multiplied because you have a couple of different layers added on there.
Right.
So,
And
go on.
one of the things I was going to say, sometimes people who have an absent parent will have very similar feelings. So having conversations with them may help, so that they're just, I think, beginning to talk about it, to realize that some of your issues or some of your fears they could be rooted in your adoption. They could be rooted in that fear and in that loss. And I think when you begin to understand that, you can get to a different place of having better relationships with people and being able to speak your truth.
Yeah, I think that's the most important thing, is speaking your truth and standing up for yourself. Why wouldn't you speak about your adoption process until the legislation?
I didn't want to make anybody else uncomfortable. I didn't want to have other people ask my parents questions. I didn't want people to ask me questions that I wasn't ready to answer. I didn't want it. It was really about just it was safer and easier just not to talk about it. And since I didn't have all the answers, I felt if people asked me things and then I really wasn't able to tell them, how was I going to deal with that piece? Would this embarrass my adoptive parents if I start talking about this? And then I realized after a while that I have to really think about me. And again, just looking at that group of folks who were just talking about their adoption experience as if it was just everyday conversation. Why can't my conversation be that simple? Why can't we just normalize this conversation so that people like me, who sat silently for over 40 something years, can feel comfort in having a conversation and not feeling like I'm going to offend someone or hurt someone's feelings, because it's bringing me a sense of peace. It's bringing me a sense of joy and healing just getting some of that stuff out.
Yeah, or even feeling judged.
Yes, absolutely.
Did you feel judged by other people being adopted?
I did, as I began to share that I was going to search for my birth family, or as people began to realize that I was going through that process, because the first comments from some friends was, why would you do that to your adopted parents? Don't you think you're being ungrateful by, going and doing a search? How dare you do that to them? And I'm not a confrontational person, so I would just kind of take it and not say anything. And then after a while, I realized, no, it's not okay for you to say that to me. It's not okay. This is about me. This isn't about my adoptive parents. It's not about hurting anybody's feelings. It's not about me finding my birth parents and leaving them. Stop painting those pictures that the media usually paints on relationships between adoptees and their birth parents, and that whole search and discovery piece, because that's not the reality of what it is. This is going to help me figure out who I am and some of the things that I struggle with over time. And if you stop thinking about, me hurting my adoptive family, and I'm telling you that they're supporting me, it was just making me feel kind of bad about, so should I do this? Shouldn't I do that? So I was always back and forth with, is it okay or is it not okay?
Yeah, it's like your mind's playing games with you because you don't know what to do.
Absolutely. And so with the stress of all of that,
Yeah.
and trying to figure that out in the mix of things, and your emotions are already all over the place, it can become overwhelming. And that's why I said the counseling and the support group, because then you need to get that stuff off of your chest. A good friend of yours tells you that, how dare you do that to your parents? And I'm like, wow, this is interesting. And how do I take that in, and how do I give that back, or how do I confront that comment, without it becoming an argument or anything? How do I say why that hurt me? And make people aware of it, really just adoption sensitivity, that is a hurtful statement.
Absolutely. And I mean, even after you're saying that, your adopted parents are supportive to this. They want you to find your birth parents. For someone just to say that, I think that's selfish on their behalf of not seeing the big picture.
And what I found out is, and especially when some guys in particular will say that, it was their fear that someone would come to them later on in life and say, you could be my birth father. I said, oh, so it's more of you taking your situation and what you think could happen to you and, trying to push that back on me. No, that's your issue. Don't let that be a part of my story. And why you're making those kind of comments to me, just insensitive. And then after a while, folks begin to change once you explain it to them and how it makes you feel. But for me, I would always just kind of take it and not say anything. And then after a while, I said, no, I can't, because it just kept happening.
So you found your voice throughout this process too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think the examples that I saw in my support group were very helpful. And I would go in and ask them, this person said this, and then the members of the group would say that, this is kind of how I addressed it when I came across those situations. So to hear people who had already experienced what I was going through and how they addressed parents, how they address aunts and uncles, so you're not coming off as disrespectful, but you're really trying to educate, but also help them become more sensitive in how they communicate certain things with you.
I think that's important. I think communication is so important when someone's expressing how they feel on an emotional level, and communication without judgment.
Yes.
I think that's the most important thing, because I could sit here and judge, but I'm just so curious as to how you went through this process. I mean, here you are, you have a birth certificate, it's locked up in a safe that you don't even have any way of getting to unless they open up a legislation. Like, just thinking of the whole process makes me tear up, because at the end of the day, you're the one that's suffering. No one else is suffering.
Right. Yeah.
But people don't even realize that, because they're just thinking of their own opinions and their own judgments and bestowing that upon you. So kudos to finding that strength to dealing with situations like that. And I know a lot of people go through that in the adoptive process, because people want to judge rather than listen and learn.
That's exactly it. Or they automatically go to what they would feel, not really even thinking about from the adoptee's perspective. So sometimes it's not really until you can frame things a certain way, or give a scenario that people, oh, I didn't think about it like that. Oh, I never thought it. So then that kind of opens people's eyes when you say, Every time I would go into the doctor's office, they would always ask me my medical history. And so I would use that as an example when somebody says, oh, well, why couldn't you just forget that you're adopted? Because it doesn't go away, people. You go to the doctors as you become a young adult and you're going on your own. You are now getting those questions, not your parents. And then you have to figure out how you're going to respond to people, especially as someone who didn't talk about my adoption a lot. So I think I wrote in the book that sometimes I would write NA, but you give that to the nurse. She still asks you the question about your medical history. The doctor comes in, they still ask you the same question. I started writing adopted on the paperwork, but they're not reading what you wrote. So it's not until they finally come in again and you just say, I'm adopted. I don't know my medical history. And then I'll say, and I wrote that on the paperwork, and then they'll go back and look because they're just coming in on their routines, just asking questions. I'm like, read what we wrote.
Yeah, the patterning, right? When you have that patterning, you don't look at anything else. So
Yep.
you spoke about the struggle that you've gone through with adoption. And I mean, there's a lot of struggles that we could talk and speak about on the podcast, but the struggle of relationship. I know that you spoke about in the book about a divorce with your husband. Let's talk about that, because I think that abandonment issue, the feeling of not feeling loved, all these other things play a huge role on relationship. Can we go down that road for now?
Yeah, I would say that I wore a mask in a relationship for a long time. I have always had fears of abandonment, that if people were here, I had to hang on to you because if you left, nobody might come after you. So then I stayed in relationships that weren't necessarily good for me and wore a mask pretending that things were okay when behind the scenes they absolutely were not. And I think many of us as adoptees deal with some self-esteem issues. We deal with wondering if we're worthy, if we're worth enough, if we're lovable. And when you question all those things about your own self-worth and your own self-esteem, you can end up in a relationship with a person that's not a good match for you. And I think it's not until you really do the work on yourself that you can find yourself into a healthier relationship. Because I found myself hanging on to something just because I was afraid to let it go. Not because it was good for me, but because I was afraid of being by myself. And then if you have someone who's constantly telling you, nobody's going to want you with 3 kids, and those things, those scenarios start playing through your mind. And before you know it, you're in year after year. And then we get into that, the storyline of, well, can I leave this relationship, or is it too late? Have I put too much time in? So all of those struggles with, am I too old? Can I start over? And all that questioning that goes back and forth with, can I leave a relationship with 3 children and make it? And for me, it wasn't really until things got really bad and hit rock bottom and I realized love shouldn't feel this way, that I decided that it was time for it to be over. Something, whatever was going to happen for me in a relationship moving forward, I couldn't even think about that. I knew that I needed to remove myself from that relationship, but then also begin to do some work on me. Why is it that I stayed in this relationship so long? Why is it that I let someone talk to me or treat me in a certain way when I knew that that's not love, and that's not healthy. And then my other fear was that because I was continuing to allow it as a mother of 3 girls, they're watching me. That whole do as I say, not as I do. They were going to do exactly what they saw me doing, not doing what I was telling them not to do. So if I didn't change my patterns, didn't change my behavior, it was going to repeat the cycle. And who knows who they would bring into their lives. So those kind of things led me to realizing that this has to end. It can't stay. I can't stay in a relationship like this. It's not good for me, and it's not good for the girls.
Yeah, and you were in that relationship for 19 years, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
19 years. And then when you went through the divorce, is it the same time you're going through finding out your adoption papers or getting your adoption papers? So you were working parallel with 2 different, I want to say 2 different evils at the same time.
Right.
Yeah. And how did you handle that? Because that's a lot of pressure on you to get a divorce, find out the truth of who you are, and now meeting your birth family, amalgamating with your adopted family. So much, like, just thinking about it makes me scratch my head. Like, how did you even handle all that?
I handled it through counseling. I always, I tell people counseling is not just for crazy people. Counseling is for all of us. We have issues. It's a non-judgmental space. If you go in and you're honest and say that you're going to do the work, your life can be changed. And after my separation, that next day I called, I had held on to a number of a counselor, and I finally reached out and set up an appointment. And then I told the girls, we're going to start. So because there's been enough trauma over this period of time that we can't wait any longer. We need to go ahead and begin to restart our lives, and we're going to restart our lives with counseling. And I told them, I really don't care what you go in and say. You'll have your own sessions, but we need to start talking about what we experienced so that we can figure out how to get over it and not make the same mistakes down the line. And they were all open to it. Now, in the beginning, I always have to say, I would always tell people I was going to the hairdresser. So instead of saying, the girl's like, Mom, are you coming home? No, I have a hairdresser's appointment. So they knew exactly what that meant. But I realized a couple times out the week, I was telling people at work that I was going to the hairdresser. That's why I was leaving work early. And then they would say, I come in the next day, but my hair wasn't done. So my oldest daughter, who worked in the building at the same time, she said, Mommy, just tell them we're going to counseling. You don't have to pretend like we're here. Who cares? Who cares? We're going to counseling because we need help. I was like, out of the mouths of babes, but she was right. Why am I hiding this? I'm hiding that because, again, we talk about counseling in secrecy. But if it was helping me, and if down the line I felt that it could help someone else, I'm going to admit it. And I'm going to tell people that I think counseling is a great thing. If you go in and be honest, if you find the right counselor, don't let your experiences where you come in, you find a counselor and then all of a sudden, oh, it's not working. Well, are you telling the truth when you go into your counseling session? Are you really doing the work? And two, every counselor is not going to be the right counselor for you. Maybe you need to find another counselor within that same organization who's a better match for you, because personalities and energy and all that stuff is important as well. So we've been just doing the work through counseling. That's kind of what got us through and got me through dealing with all that while going to work and now becoming a single parent, and everything that goes along with going through a divorce and the emotional trauma that goes along with all that as well, because you also have to grieve that loss, because that's another loss in your life.
Absolutely. That's what I'm saying. You had so many different things going on that the uproar of emotions were just, I could imagine that we're on full peak. So dealing with that, and I think counseling is really important for everyone and anyone, just to go talk your emotions to someone and make sense of them sometimes.
Right.
I think it's extremely important. I know we're coming near the end of the show, but I still have a few questions. Do you have some more time?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So when your adopted parents and your birth parents met, what did that feel like to you?
That we did it on two separate occasions. Mm-hmm. So with my birth mother, one of the things we found out after I got her name on my original birth certificate, we popped her name in Google, we popped her name in Facebook, and found out she was an associate pastor in the church, but also found out that she lived a few cities over from where I currently stay. And so from there, I sent a letter to both of the locations that we found, or the addresses we found online, and I redirected her back to social media, Facebook, and told her I sent a message there where I used my birth name. So I figured she would know as soon as she saw that I was legit. It wasn't somebody that was trying to pull her leg or play around or, catfish, if you will, catfish her. And so she did. She went back to that. She called me late January, and I confirmed who I was, gave her the information that I had, actually sent her a copy of my driver's license, which probably wasn't a good idea, but I wanted her to know that I was a real person, and that I was her daughter. And she and I had communicated via Messenger for a couple of weeks before we actually met. And when I met her at her church, where she gave her testimony. She gave her testimony before her church. She felt that it was important as a pastor to share some of the challenges and some of the joys that she had as she was growing up. And she wanted to share with them my existence. And after that, she introduced me to herself, because that was her first time meeting me, and me to her congregation. So it was just a powerful moment. The preacher never got to the sermon that day. Everybody was just crying. It was just, it was very crazy.
Yeah.
And that was the moment that she also introduced my parents, my adopted parents, to her congregation as well. And to see them embrace and to see her thank my parents for caring for me. I haven't even been able to go back and look at the video because it was recorded. I can't even listen to the audio. It was just so overwhelming. And but that was a really good experience. And then what we did a month later was have my birth father come to my adopted father's house, and we did this little family game night. We're very much into games and activity to keep people moving around. And I was terrified that he was coming, and I was in the kitchen. He had finally arrived, and he was coming down the hallway one way. I was coming on like an L. So as soon as we met at the intersection, we just both had a chance to look at him. And I'm thinking, I don't know why I thought short, but I'm looking here, and next thing I know, I have to look up. I said, okay. And my adopted mother says, see where you get your height from. So that was, again, a powerful moment. One of the things he did while he was at the house was present some information to me about my family history. They're very much into knowing where you come from. And so he gave us, pictures of my grandparents and some other documents and some books that have different family members written in who were involved in the Tuskegee Airmen, just all kinds of stuff that he really just wanted me to be aware of in terms of my lineage.
That's incredible. And your birth mom didn't talk to you because she wanted you to hear her voice at the congregation. So you guys didn't even talk. She was like, no, I just want to save.
She would not. My birth, the same day I spoke to her via text messages or via messages on Facebook was the same day that I actually spoke to my birth father. But she would not talk to me. And at first I didn't understand it because my birth father would call me every other day and we'd stay on the phone for hours, but I did not talk to her until about a month later, when she said, I don't want to hear, and she finally told me because I said something about talking on the phone. She said, well, I really don't want to hear your voice until I actually see you. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, I think that's an emotional thing too. Because like when you're speaking about the congregation, her coming basically clean is what I feel.
Yeah.
With what she's going through, because you think she's a pastor, she's got her stuff together, there's nothing that's wrong with her, and then all of a sudden she comes with this story.
Yeah,
like that's a powerful moment and vulnerability for someone to go through that
her family had no clue. Her sister, her nieces, they had no clue of my existence.
Oh wow.
Her parents knew, but her parents are deceased now, but that was a family secret. And even before the church service, she said, I need to go and meet with what's her aunt, her mother's sister. She said, I need to, because she was the eldest relative in the family at the time. I think she was 96 when I met her. And she said, I have to go and have a private conversation with her. She said, because nobody in the family knew. Whereas on the opposite side, my birth father, all of his siblings knew of my existence when my birth mother was pregnant. And his parents knew. So it was interesting having those two different dynamics.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's incredible. So how do your birth parents and your adopted parents get along today?
Everybody's fine. We have had I think in the book that's posted now, because I edited and revised the book, there are a few pictures of the wedding ceremony. I did end up getting married. My birth father and my adopted father walked me down the aisle. My birth mother and my adopted father sang at the wedding, and my adopted mother, took part in the prayer and lighting the candles and all the other things. So everybody was present. It's just now for me trying to figure out, how do I manage time? Because like I said, all of our families are very close. So how do I give this person enough time and that person enough time? And how do you communicate and make sure you told this one the same story you told that one, so that somebody doesn't feel left out? So I'm still learning to balance all of that out.
You just have to have big family blended parties.
Yeah. And that's what, it's funny, the young man that I had, because we got married during COVID. So I had my daughter's friend kind of MC the wedding ceremony that we had in our backyard. And he looked around and he said, I can't believe this. He said, you got this one who's divorced from that one, and this one who's married to this one. He said, it's all love here. He said, there is no drama. He said, I'm waiting to walk by a table to hear some shade that somebody says something about somebody else. He said, but everybody is just getting along. And he stood there for a while and just watched. He was standing on the deck and he just kind of watched what people were doing. He said, I've never seen anything like this.
How beautiful.
Yeah, it's been an amazing journey, and it's still an adjustment. Like I said, because when you have family members who are close and they want you to come for their event and this event, and now that I'm married, my husband's family is very close. So we're trying to figure out how to manage time.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what a beautiful story. That's a beautiful ending, I think, like just meeting the whole family, everyone gets along. It's just pure love. That's a beautiful way for you to say, like, this was worth the journey that I went through. This was worth the pain that I had to go through in order to find my birth parents. That's what I would think. How does
Yeah.
it feel for you?
Yeah, it does. It was worth the journey. I think it happened at the right time. I knew that I I wouldn't have been able, I don't think, to handle the stress that came along with even the reunions or even leading up to the reunions, of all the things that are going through your mind and all the things you're struggling with during other points in my life. So I think it happened at a good time in my life and really prepared me to be in a relationship that I'm in now with the counseling, the support groups, and talking about my journey. Because that I met them in my birth mother in February, my birth father in March, and I met my now husband that same year in July. So
Oh, wow.
there was a lot going on in 2017.
You really like putting a lot of stuff on your plate, don't you?
I know. So that must be crazy. I don't know how this keeps happening.
All divine timing and all
Yes.
divine guidance.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So what would you consider love today? What does love mean to you today?
Unconditional love, caring for people. I think with love and comes family, and that there's many extensions of what family means, and love has all shapes and forms. One of the challenges I found early on in this whole reunion piece was people would question whether or not once I found my birth parents, if I was just going to kind of put my adopted parents to the side. And I would always say, if I love my 3 children, you don't question, do I love one more than the other? You just know that I love them. I said, so why are you questioning me about whether or not I can still have a relationship with my adoptive and my birth parents? It's all about love. It's all about love. It's all about unconditional love. It's all about support. Whatever happened in the past, and we can't go back and change those stories. We can't rewrite them, but we can only move forward from where we are now and create these new chapters in our journey.
So beautiful. It is all about love. Really, it is all about love. The journey that you went through shows that the love within yourself is what I'm feeling more than anything. Like that love of wanting to get to that next level to recognize who you are. That's a beautiful story. You have a beautiful story.
Thank you. Thank you.
I wish a lot of people that are going through adoption could have this beautiful story like you have.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that there is trauma in stories. There's
Absolutely.
stories.
Absolutely. And one of the things you will find, because that's often a question, well, do I think other people should go on their searches and their reunions, and what happens if their information or their journey isn't as positive, let's say, as yours? And if for many adoptees, you'll hear them say that have had challenging reunion stories, it's about the journey. It's about what you learn about yourself along the journey. Sometimes reunions, there isn't a positive relationship with your birth mother or your birth father, but you can connect with other relatives in the family that may make the story more positive in a sense. So some of those pieces that you'll hear adoptees say, positive or negative, they're happy that they went through that journey. They're happy that they had that experience, because then they can work those other things out in their life over time.
Yeah, I could imagine all the things that they have to work out over time, because it's a process of mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. So there's so many different layers to it. What would you tell your younger self today?
Ooh, that's a good question. You are lovable. You are lovable. Don't hang on what the media says about adoption and your journey as an adoptee. You are adopted, but that's not the end all and be all of who you are. Continue to work on yourself and do things that you're passionate about, and kind of really go with things that you are passionate about, because I steered away from singing and some other things in the arts because I always felt that I was just trying to do too much, as the kids say, and that I was just trying to be over top with things. I didn't want to be perceived as being over top, but I really enjoyed singing. And it just didn't make sense for me until I met my birth parents and realized that my birth mother sang. And now I look at singing and using my voice in a completely different way than I did in the past. I'm no longer afraid, to go ahead and say, yeah, I can sing a song and things of that nature. So I would tell my younger self, just do you. Don't worry about what social media says. Don't worry about what the media says about being adopted. Do some research, because there's tons of resources out there. Learn a little bit about what those adoption issues are and how that impacts you. If I had known some of this stuff, I would realize, okay, I'm not crazy. I'm just a little quirky and it's okay. Then you realize that they're normal issues that adoptees have, but that you can work through all that stuff.
So beautiful. Joi, thank you so much for being on the podcast and sharing your story with us.
Thank you for having me and for taking a risk on a topic that most people do not want to talk about. I always say, stop whispering, let's talk about adoption. And so I really do appreciate the fact that you went on this journey with me today.
Thank you. No, I really want to go on this journey because I think a lot of people struggle with this. And just like depression, we have to give it a voice to say, hey, stop the silence here. Let's start helping people that need it the most. And let's start really working with one another in order for people to feel fulfilled in their life before they go back home. So thank you for writing the book. For everyone, Finding Joy, a true story of faith, family, and love. This is a true story of faith, family, and love. And Joi, for some reason, wanted to take it all in at one time. So anyone that's going through an adoptee situation, you could connect with Joi. All of information is going to be in the show notes below. I'm also going to put some links on there for any other counseling support groups that you need. I'll do Canada and the US because this is my neighborhood. But at the end of the day, if you need any other information, just Google that stuff up or DuckDuckGo away and really find that support system that you're looking for. You're not going crazy. It's absolutely normal to be going through certain situations when you're an adoptee. An emotion is an emotion, regardless if you're an adoptee or not. We all have these emotions that we have to work through. And the reason I chose this topic, because it interests me, because I did have friends that went through the adoption process. And to me, it was something that I really had to bring a thought to it, a voice to it, to really understand what everyone goes through, because we can't judge a book by its cover. We have to actually read the pages that's in the book. So thank you, Joi, once again for sharing your story with us. It was such a pleasure to have you here and to really open your heart up to the love that you spread and continue to spread, being an advocate for adoptees as well.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you everyone for watching, and please join us in the Empress Hangout on our private Facebook group and connect with us on Instagram. Until we connect again, have yourself a great day. Bye for now.